what's happening is insight is being conflated with information or data. But this general conflation of data with insight is a bit of a problem. There have been positions where I'm sitting with a client and a client asks me a question and I say, I don't know, okay? And I look at some other expert and say, hey, what do you think? And the person, the partner or whoever, calls up my evaluator and says that, oh, that was very underwhelming. You know, he's an expert and he said, I don't know in front of a client.
To start with the second part of this evening, which, as I said, is a kind of continuum of what we discussed with Matthew earlier, which is a sense of agency that comes from within, not out of having the kind of geopolitical power, military strength, new weaponization of trade, none of that. The true origin of power begins with yourself. And some of the qualities that we really think are God-given, part of our birth temperament, turns out that they're really skills that you can generate, perfect, much like the way we all go to gyms. And Matthew earlier didn't quite say that phrase, but it really struck me when he said that when you meditate, and you really have to focus on what you're meditating on, because if you're doing exercises for your arm, doesn't mean that your leg is getting exercised, So it's as mindful as that. And the next conversation then is about the power of insight. Many of us refer to each other as insightful people. It does not occur to us that we could actually train ourselves for insight as a skill. And Santosh Desai, who wrote a foreword to this book that we are all here to discuss, in fact, came up with another beautiful phrase, which is that he said, it's not just a to-do list, but that you can build a temperament for insight. So what is that temperament? What are the ingredients of it? How do we acquire those skills? And how do we deploy that very precious skill in a world of information overload, data-driven, AI-driven? What does it then mean to be human and to be able to have insight in a world when machines are creating insight for us? To discuss that, we have a fantastic speaker. Vivek Banerji has been an insights global leader with McKinsey in New York and in London. Earlier, he was with Pepsi and with IMRB. But much more than that, he has been somebody who's always been a polymath. He's a karate, I won't say the word master, but second dan karate sort of devotee. He also plays the jazz piano. And he now has a company called Insight Dojo based in UK, which provides insight solutions to corporates and governments and other entities by combining many methods of information seeking. And at the heart of it is this idea that you can train insight. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Vivek Banerji. In full disclosure, this is also a bit of a friend moment because Vivek and I have been friends for pretty much 30 years, so it's a particular pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
So Vivek, I just want to start, like I was earlier asking Matthew to define things so that we know that we agree what we're talking about. Your entire book, your entire career has been about insight. But first, let's just define insight. In your understanding, what is it?
Okay, yeah, so there are many definitions
of insight.
There are many definitions of insight. People talk about looking at the hidden parts of truth or hidden truth, or some people talk about restructuring problems. So there are many ways people have defined it. The way I define it is it's my working definition that insight is always in a context. So within a context, the process of moving from not knowing to knowing in a way that empowers you to make positive changes, for me, that is insight. And for me, that kind of covers a whole range of insights from the small insight that you have while you're solving a mathematical problem to an insight that will make you come up with a breakthrough innovation. So, but the context is really important. So that's my definition.
So, it's very interesting you use the phrase to move from not knowing to knowing is insight. Now, we live in a world of, data overload, information overload. What's the difference then between having information and having insight? Because you could actually read and get information. Is there a difference between information and insight?
So yes, so I think you're kind of getting into why I wrote this book, okay? So
Can everyone at the back hear him? Yeah. Just speak into the
mic. Okay.
Ouch. Okay.
When I hear my voice like this, I feel like doing an Elvis Presley thing, right?
I'll ask you to do that as well.
Okay. Yeah. So the reason I wrote this book is for two reasons. One is almost conveying a school of thought, which is what your question is. The second is so that the book is really useful to everyone. So on the first point, so what's happening is insight is being conflated with information or data. And don't get me wrong, I really love the fact that you can process huge amounts of data. We have great computing powers, great algorithms, and you could not do the kind of analysis you're doing in genomics, for instance, if you didn't have fantastic data and capacity to analyze it. But this general conflation of data with insight is a bit of a problem, according to me. So because I believe, and I think a lot of people believe, and there's a lot of research also, that insight is an embodied experience. So
embodied experience.
It's a mind-body thing that happens. And in all my career, I feel that sometimes when you kind of look at, and even when we talk of information, the way our minds and bodies are, sometimes the information is not very structured, right? Like the conversation we're having, you're sitting here, that's information too, but our concept of information is so reductive, it almost goes back to what Matthew was saying about, naming people Shoma and Matthew, and, thinking that that's what it is, but even in a very organizational context, so much of what's happening is ignored because you just reduce it to data, and that also, which is amenable mostly for quantitative analysis, right? And you miss out on what's happening. So, and I'm talking about real practical business situations where people have gained huge amounts of profit because they chose to look more holistically. So that's, for me, is what, that's the kind of school of thought.
So if I were to kind of distill that, are you saying that the difference in information is that, and insight, is that insight will typically shift your perception on something, whereas information could be a kind of expanded, it could reinforce things that you know already, or it may, but the core idea of insight is that it completely shifts your perception on something?
It shifts you, and because the way we are, I think unless we realize something, we don't act also. So the Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh, whom I followed quite a bit, he kind of always distinguishes between idea and insight. An idea is a cerebral concept. Insight is when it strikes you, right? And that kind of compels you to act and in a particular way, in a given context, right? So that's how I talk about it. And the reason I think it's so important today, we are always facing so much uncertainty. You talk about it. Like, just look at the kind of uncertainty there is in the world.
Give us your full baritone. The force of your argument.
Okay, again, the Elvis. Okay, so, no, there's so much of uncertainty, and yet we all need to make decisions, right? And information can't help us get through that. We need insight. And what I say in my book is that to have insight, first you have to acknowledge what the problem you're solving and frame it and acknowledge the massive levels of uncertainty there is. And then I say that you actually have to cultivate a state of not knowing and be really humble and get rid of lots of ideas in your head, because unless you do that, you won't be able to see. And then I say that after that, you need to train yourself to transcend one-sidedness. Train in 3 particular ways how we think. Okay, when we have to think in many different ways. We have to be creative, we have to be analytical, we have to be intuitive, we have to observe, we have to be empathetic, and all of these things need training. Curiosity is a practice. It's not just a word. Empathy is a practice, or whatever it is, right? Observation, you can keep just getting better at it if you train yourself. Then the second point is of transcending one-sidedness is how we approach knowledge. Because in the real world, things don't fall in neat disciplines. They're always at the intersection of many disciplines, and you have to constantly navigate this breadth and depth. For instance, when you're doing synapse, okay, or you come here, there are different people are coming here from different backgrounds. So, and you're preparing for that. So I'm sure what you're doing is you're reading up and you're saying, how deep do we go? How broad do we go? And that's with everything. So there's that bit, right? And the third bit is about how insight in the real world, it's not about just having insight. You have to transmit it with the people with whom you're working. So, you have to be, again, multifaceted in that way. It's also, you have to be a visionary.
So I'm going to bring that back, because, when you say you have to be, it's again why I was pursuing Matthew earlier, that to just say that one should be something is not giving agency to people to become that, So I think what is an interesting proposition in your book is that you are not just born insightful, you can train yourself to be insightful.
Yes.
So I want to come back to some of these things that you just said. What are the, exercises? The gym instructor for insight is what I'd like to get to. But the first element of it that you said was that you needed to be a mind-body experience. What do you mean by that? What is the element of the body in insight?
I think it works in both ways. When you have insights, it's a real experience. You feel this relief, you feel or excitement because you have this aha moment. But it also works the other way. For instance, if you're not relaxed, or if there's too much tension, you're not going to be able to perceive what's happening. And so may I use a kind of jazz metaphor to explain? So I go and typically where I live in Guildford in England, every month I go for something called a jazz jam, okay? So you go there, there's a crowd I don't know, there are musicians I meet there at the bandstand, and some of them are professionals, they are so much better than me. And then you're playing, and you don't know what you're going to play because you're improvising. You don't know a single note. That's the whole point of it. So within that, I have to be harmonious with the crowd, harmonious with the musicians. I have to let myself go so that I'm wanting my body and to kind of operate. I want my fingers to take over. All this requires me to be tremendously relaxed and mindful and present. In fact, I always meditate or chant or do something before I'm going. And this is preceded by a lot of rigorous training. You're practicing, you're analyzing other people's work, you're reading theory. But for you to perform, finally, you have to get into the state of relaxation, and your body has to be in a good position. And then all the kind of serendipity strikes in, and it's kind of pretty analogous to insight. You look at your solos, oh, I did that pretty cool thing, but I didn't know it was going to happen. But insight is like that too, right? It happens when you're working in organizations with very, very formal organizations like Procter & Gamble, Pepsi, Amgen. When you work with people and you work in this way, you come up with very transformational ideas. And that's been my experience, and that's why I wanted to share it in the book, because we can completely be misled by saying, because the other side of it is I say that, oh, I don't acknowledge the uncertainty enough. I want to control it quickly. I launch some project. I do a survey, just to control it. I imagine that that is what the truth is, and I go in a particular direction, confirming what I already know, and lose out big opportunities for kind of achieving my objective, whatever that objective is, whether it's a business or a, so enterprise.
So that's an interesting argument. So you're saying, I just want to go through some of
sure.
the
Absolutely.
exercises of building insight.
Yeah.
And in that, so one, you said, yes, the state of the body, because that is the platform or the sort of vehicle through which you will get insight. The other you've been saying again and again is to actually embrace not knowing, to really to accept that there's uncertainty. So to start from a position of clear not knowing is a good ingredient to getting to insight.
Yes.
Do you think that you're coming from this very formal corporate world? Do you think that not enough of that happens, and is it hard to create in the DNA of a company?
I think it's very difficult because knowledge is weaponized, and confidence is valued a lot. So even, in my consulting days, I know there have been positions where I'm sitting with a client and a client asks me a question and I say, I don't know, okay? And I look at some other expert and say, hey, what do you think? And the person, the partner or whoever, calls up my evaluator and says that, oh, that was very underwhelming. He's an expert, and he said, I don't know in front of a client. Right, it doesn't make a difference to the client because it's a long-term project. But that's the extent of, there's this
culture.
Whole front of that I know, or when you go, this is best practice. Okay, you've done you encounter two situations, and that becomes best practice. And so you see that a lot, and constantly projecting that I've done this before, right? So, so reversing that takes a lot of effort. But there are people who are very receptive to it. There are organizations who are very receptive to it because when they actually are facing a really hard problem and they can't solve it, people sometimes do get into that state. And I've been very pleasantly surprised when the extent to which you can kind of get this kind of thinking in very formal, large organizations. It's not easy, but it's a problem. I mean, I wouldn't say that it's...
So you're saying certitude is the first problem to insight.
Right,
yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. And there's also this whole, because you can't stay with uncertainty. Because you can't stay with uncertainty, what happens, I have to learn how to say that word, since I'm going to say it so much, right? So
you're uncertain about how to say uncertainty.
Exactly. So what happens is when you're trying to look at a situation, people are constantly saying, so what's the so what? What's the so what, right? It's become a, and you know why people are saying that, because there's been a long tradition of people analyzing and producing information which is useless, so it kind of, it gets into this thing, what's the so what? But then it gets to such a state that, the so what becomes so important that, that gets in the way of understanding the what, right? What's happening. You're not seeing it because you're always seeing it from the lens of your own kind of utility. And so it's not that the so what doesn't matter, but it's about when you're looking at the truth, you have to kind of suspend that constant urge to take advantage of the situation and see, let's just see the situation, right? And I have to understand it, and then we'll get to the so what, right? So that is, I think, very hard for a lot of people who are, busy, stressed, wanting to control, get ahead. And that's why I talk about, I'm very inspired by Ian McGilchrist's work on the master and the emissary, where he traces this two ways of attending. One is about getting ahead, using the world as a tool, and the other is about being, about empathy, and he relates it to the left and the right hemisphere. And he makes the argument the world is getting more and more into using the world as a tool and getting ahead, which is getting in the way of seeing the truth, noticing what's different, and that has to be kind of balanced. And that's why I talk about, transcending one-sidedness And the kind of the being part has to be, I think, enhanced more.
Right. So I want to come to a couple of other, elements of insight. But before that, I wanted to clarify this for the audience. And I think I was pushing Matthew for that as well, which is to say that very often the good qualities of being human are also seen as a kind of bleeding heart, doing good, not something that's really going to get you ahead
Yes.
in the conventional way, So very often that's why it falls by the wayside. You are in the cutthroat world of consultancy. It's as corporate can get. And you're saying that these are the qualities that will actually get you ahead as
Absolutely.
well in the corporate world, that these lead to better decision making in a material world. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. So here's what happens. So just imagine how competitive the world is. You have to be creative. Even in a very competitive world, you need to be able to see things differently, see the same thing subjectively. And it's very hard to do that unless you train yourself again to be open-minded, humble, acknowledge that things are uncertain. And I've seen it so many times now in, where...
So give an example.
Yeah, I'll give an example. And, in my book, I talk about 5 archetypes of uncertainty, which is, insight helps in seeing the future, it helps in simplifying complexity, it helps in bringing creative things to the world, it helps in changing hard to change behaviors. But the one I'm going to talk about is the kind of uncertainty in everywhere around us.
Let's find another. See,
Hindi
word
unknowns. Oh, the Hindi word is very hard. It's anishchita. Who's gonna? The Urdu word is gair yakini. Who's gonna understand that? So
you can see how most cultures don't value the word of not knowing.
So with Hindi, I have to say badlav or tabdili or something like that.
You were saying that you were going to pick one aspect.
So I'll give an example of the kind of unknowns that are there in your immediate environment, what anthropologists or artists sometimes call making the familiar strange, right? So I was working for a company, and they had this natural product for menopausal symptoms like hot flushes and things like that. And a lot of people know that HRT is the standard sort of medical kind of therapy for that, right? Now, the sales of this therapy were kind of stagnant or plateauing, in fact. And they called us, and the sales changed after they got the insight. In the next 6 months, it grew by 40%, and now it's a clear market leader. So now you may say, what's the insight, right? So the insight was a very small one, and I'm kind of very inspired by this economist, very eclectic economist called, who used to be Hirschman, who used to talk about these petite idées, which is little ideas, not grand theories. So the kind of insight I'm talking about is little idea, petite idée, right? And what happened? The client had this view that doctors in this country, again, context is really important, that doctors, being very scientific people, value evidence, and our natural product has a lot of good data, and we will convince the doctors that this is actually like a prescription drug because the evidence is so good, right? And that sounds totally plausible. And in fact, in many countries, that is absolutely the correct assumption. Now, what we found, and because we didn't just go and administer a questionnaire or do a focus group, what I did, in fact, I did the work, is I said, look, I just want to explore what's really happening. So I want to go into the offices of the doctor, hang around, ask them, what do you do, how do you behave? And what I found is that, by and large, most doctors not only value natural therapies, they go to training courses, they talk about natural ingredients as almost as technologies, like, oh, red clover works like this, black horseshoe. So, this whole barrier that they were imagining didn't exist, right? And the barrier was that these guys needed a good story about how the client's natural product worked on the symptoms. So that's what needed work. So our recommendation was and by the way, there were also the skeptics. So the client wasn't entirely wrong, but the skeptics were far fewer than these ones. So
the core difference that you did was that instead of doing a focus group, going by data, you actually had this instinct to go and do something experiential.
Experiential, and in a very open-ended manner. And I can tell you, a lot of people wouldn't have even noticed during the conversation these little things that suddenly, and when you're in a doctor's office, they're actually opening the drawer, pulling out the thing and saying, here, look at this, look at that, and this training program I went to. And this is just a very tiny sort of insight. There's nothing like grand in this. But
it
this
changed
thing
the fortune
completely
of the
changed
company.
the thing. Now, for this to have happened, however, it could have gone the other way around. The client CEO could have said, no, I'm quite convinced about this. I just want you to test it. And many consulting companies would say, oh, we are very hypothesis-driven. And they would have just confirmed the thing. And they said, OK, this is how we'll tweak the story with the evidence, right? Instead of saying that actually this is not going to happen. And then what happens is sometimes when you're presenting, there'll be clients who will say that I want to see the presentation before it goes to the CEO because I don't want surprises, right? And to have insight, you want to surprise people, you want to disrupt them, you want to inspire them. Not surprising is probably the worst thing you can do if you're trying to produce insights. But it's very kind of common in the corporate world to say, oh, I don't want any surprises. You're always managing risk. Hey, what's going to happen, right? So, some clients asked me, and I said, sorry, it's a different story. But I was slightly nervous, so I called the CEO the night before, and I told him the whole thing. And
softened the surprise.
To soften the surprise, but he listened to me, and he heard the whole thing. So he said, you realize you're telling me exactly the opposite of what we've been working on. And I said, yes. Then he said, this is beautiful. Then he said, this is art. Okay, and the next day he said, I'm so happy. So this receptivity, when people have, it's fantastic. And it can be cultivated. People can be trained for it, right?
Right. So I just want to, we have another speaker, so we're going to run out of time. I just, again, want to make this translatable to the audience. So just very quickly to recap before we come to one other big idea you have. But you're saying, one, to embrace uncertainty. I got that right. To be open, to actually arrive at something completely different, to make your body relaxed, to prep with huge amount of information gathering. Before, you said breadth and depth, so it's not just that you're wandering around waiting for serendipity to strike, but that you're really preparing for it. So in this, two questions. One, you've come up with this idea of pragmatic polymathy. What is that? And two, you've talked about being, or I've spoken about you being a karate, student as well as a jazz student. In what ways has that helped you train yourself,
Okay.
And what is it that others can do?
Yeah.
Like, what is the training aspect of this?
Yeah, so quickly, the one other element, apart from the, the receptivity and not knowing, is also realizing, I've talked about multiple methods. I'm very much in favor of using methods to get to the truth, but my notion is that every method has its limitations. So that's why I've talked about 10 families of methods. So this going and meeting people in context is just one family. Types of machine learning are the others. There are many.
So we're just going to tease your book and let people read it. I want you to just talk about this one idea because we're running out of time.
The polymathy one.
Yes.
So the polymathy idea is very simple. So my concept is, I don't call it polymathy because when you think of polymaths, you're thinking of Leonardo da Vinci, right? And that's not accessible. But pragmatic polymathy is people like you, me, everyone. We are versatile. But that's just embracing that most things are multifaceted, and so you have to get range, but you also have to get depth, okay? Because if you don't go into things deeply and you say that I'm a very smart guy, I'm an integrator, the real world is too complex. So you have to constantly kind of dive deep into things and go broad and be very agile about that. And pragmatic polymathy is just a way of doing that, and I think anybody can do that, and I've given guidelines in the book. So
sure. You did speak about how being a jazz pianist actually deeply prepares you for getting insight in your corporate world as well.
Yeah.
You know, so that was an interesting insight. But just the last question is that, is there a particular way in which you can have a corporate structure or a large organization or a government or any powerful institution which is open to insight but is not also a space for like chaos? Because if everybody was coming up with something disruptive, it can also, I'm sympathetic to a large organization trying to have order as well as insight. So how would you balance those two things?
I think what I'm saying is it's not chaos creating, right? It's not chaos creating. It's
how do you create a culture for insight?
Culture, so it depends. You need some kind of a champion. The easiest way is when your C-suite or the senior people or the leaders of an organization are attuned to that kind of thinking, and we have people in the room, like Vibha is here. She's very much like that. I mean, my boss. And there are people like that who naturally will make it happen. But if not, then you find a champion. That's what I do. Like if there's an organization which is very, there'll always be a few people who are receptive to this kind of thinking, and then you show value. See, everyone responds once you show that this led to solid outcomes. People get converted. The most skeptical people will get converted if you show the outcome. So that's how it works, and then you back into the process. Okay,
right.
so that's how you do it.
I think the other very important for our times altogether was this idea of not being one-sided, and that again is like a very common culture too, and it's becoming increasingly part of our culture.
And I'll give an example of your work on this. Can I? Just one.
Okay.
So I had watched an interview.
Is one step of insight flattery because that worked?
No, because I've been a long admirer of your work, so I'm very grateful to be here. But there's a interview a long time ago, I don't know in which platform you did, was of Subramaniam Swami, okay? And the moment you say Subramaniam Swami, you get a very clear sort of picture of what's gonna be the rhetoric. But in your interview, you had covered him in a very complete sort of way, and I was watching that and I felt I could see many sides of him. And that creating that space suddenly, helps you have that conversation, and you're getting into a truth which is inaccessible if you kind of go in with sort of just a preconceived notion. So I think, transcending one-sidedness is just, I believe, really, really important, right? So.
No, thank you for that. And in fact, that just plays to something that we spoke about in another Ignition platform in Chennai last week, in fact. Amish Tripathi was there, and he was talking about literally the manners of debate and conflict in the Indian scriptures. And there's this idea of Purva Paksha and then Uttar Paksha. And it's a little bit like what you just said, that it's literally part of the Natya Shastra, that you first listen to somebody, you completely articulate what they are trying to say, correctly represent their perspective, and when they feel completely understood is when you present your opposing point of view, And that actually would diffuse conflict half the time, because if someone feels understood,
yes,
respected, and then disagreed with, then pretty much there wouldn't be so much conflict.
Absolutely. And just one last point I'll say, because you asked me this question, what martial arts, jazz, and everything teaches you is how much you can transform through practice. That is because you don't imagine the kind of transformation that will happen within you, and then you keep practicing and you see that. And these are pretty hard skills, so if anyone can do that, like I have no special talent. If I have moved up through practice, I think most people can. So it gives you a conviction in practice. So that's the thing I'd end on. So, right.
Thank you so much, Vivek. Just the idea that insight is something you can practice is amazing. very empowering. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you for having me here. Thank you, everyone.